Hi everyone, this is Carl. Welcome to the Parent Faith video series. This runs in conjunction with my book, Apparent Faith, What Fatherhood Taught Me About the Father's Heart. I'm glad that you're here. Well, it all started at an IHOP restaurant. My children were all adults and it was tough to get together, and we finally made a time and got together. And as I was listening to my children, I realized they were teaching me things. And I don't remember what we were talking about, probably about politics and religion, which we never talked about in my home. But now we were sitting in IHOP and they were teaching me. I had dreamed about instructing them and teaching them throughout the years. And then I imagined this little meeting at IHOP that they would all come together and say, "Dad, I'm really glad that you shared all of your wisdom with me, and we're so grateful for that." And as you know, as a parent, that just rarely ever happens. But what I noticed was that they were teaching me some things, and if they were teaching me things, that means that they had learned for themselves and they began to mature. So I was happy and excited about that. But that got me to thinking that maybe I had been complacent in my beliefs. Maybe I had not kept up with what God was trying to tell me. Maybe I'm wrong. And not that maybe I'm wrong, but at this point I got to thinking, I'm pretty sure that I am. I'm wrong about a few things. So in the book, in Apparent Faith, I examine all of those beliefs, those things that, as I look back at raising my children, I just laid that kind of alongside my views about God, and I began to examine those. And it was kind of like a journey that I share in the book about how raising my children and reflecting on that influenced how I now believe about God. One of those common beliefs is that God turns away from us, that God turns his back on us, some people say, or God rejects us, or because of our sin, that God turns away. Well, as a father, as I look back upon my children, I find that now hard to believe. I find it hard to believe because I told each of my children that I would never do that. When they made bad decisions, what it really made me want to do is draw closer, not to back away. Adam and Eve in the garden, when they made a mistake, God draws closer to them. He seeks them out. The prodigal son, the father waits for them to come back. He's not rejecting them. He's not turning his back on them. He runs toward them. I think most parents, when they do draw away from their children, when they have that instinct, I think it's because they're embarrassed. I don't think God is that immature. Another way that I examined was God's work. You know, sometimes God's work is kind of like when I tell my children to take out the trash. I would say, "Can you take out the trash?" And they would get what I call the wobbly leg syndrome, that they would stumble forward like they were just exhausted, like they couldn't possibly do another thing. And it doesn't matter that they had been sitting on the couch for a couple of hours, but God's work, I imagined it like I imagined my children, that someday they would get old enough where they could do some stuff and lighten my load. So we use that terminology with God. We say that I wish I could be used by God. And we know that in certain circles that's dangerous language to use. We hear, "Here I am, send me," as Onward Christian Soldiers plays in the background. But I don't think that's the best model for a family. I don't think that's the best model for a church. I don't think it's the best model for an interaction between parents and children. It's not really what God wants. What does God want? Well, I found a quote by a guy named Bob Goff, and some of you may be familiar with Bob, but Bob Goff says this. He says, "I don't think a father's job when it is done best, or I do think a father's job when it is done best, is to get down on both knees, lean over his children's life and whisper, what do you want to do today? Where do you want to go? Every day God invites us on the same kind of adventure. It's a trip. It's not a trip where he sends us a rigid itinerary. He simply invites us. God asks, what is it that he's made us to love? What is it that captures our attention? What finds that deep, indescribable need of our souls to experience the richness of his world that he made? And then, leaning over us, he whispers, let's go do that together. I think that's a much better picture of what a parent and a child relationship should be, not using each other in any kind of way. Another view I looked at is that God punishes us. God punishes us. I had 3 children, and 2 of them were fairly easy to discipline. You could kind of just look at them the wrong way and they would start crying. But the other one of our children was very stubborn. And she didn't respond well to any kind of aggression or discipline. But they're all very disciplined as adults now. But I think discipline is misunderstood. Discipline is not necessarily punishment. Discipline is not making them do something. God doesn't control us. If you think about it, God doesn't make you do anything. My children, I found out, and this is what I found as I was looking back over the years, my children were often frustrated, not rebellious. They were often confused, not confrontational. And they needed grace, mercy, and compassion more than punishment. God's discipline may be something totally different than we once imagined. It's more obvious now to me that God is not wanting to punish me, that God is not retributive. Similar to parents, we set an example and we show them the way. We could say God's example is Jesus. But it's very hard for me to believe that God turns away from us. It's very hard to believe that God wants to use us, and also that God is just waiting to punish us. Sitting in that IHOP restaurant looking at my children, I can't imagine life without them. And I think God feels the same way. So this then is the framework for the book, and it's the framework for this course. I hope you enjoy as you come along. Next time we're going to talk about original good in parents. I invite you back.